So hi everyone and welcome to another episode of Architecture in the Den with me, your host Lisa Rains. I'm an architect and a franchisor up in Manchester in England. So I do basically, if you were wanting to set up a practice, you could come under the Pride Road banner and sort of buy a franchise off Pride Road and then go off and practice. I don't think that's something you'll be looking at doing in the short term, John Warburton.
Absolutely not. I am weeks away from retirement. I set the date last week, and it's going to be the bank holiday in August.
Fantastic. So tonight I'm welcoming John Warburton to the stage, and John is an incredibly experienced architect. Do you want to just tell us a bit briefly about your history, and I might pick you up on a few things.
Sure, yeah. I qualified in 1980, January 1980, I think it was, and I've been in architectural practice in one form or another ever since.
Where did you go to uni?
I went to uni at Leeds.
Yeah.
I did the whole thing in Leeds. The part one and part two of the course were both there. I have to say it wasn't my first choice, but it was probably the best choice.
Was
end.
that the poly?
It was the poly when I first started, yes. Although it functioned as a completely separate faculty almost. They were in a separate building and just called themselves the School of Architecture. There was never any mention of the poly at all in the titles.
Yeah, I went to Leeds Poly to start off with.
Right.
There you go.
Much later than I did.
When I started at Leeds Poly, and when I left, it was Leeds Metropolitan University.
Yeah, well, the School of Architecture, when I first started, was in the old Victorian building that's opposite the Morrison's car park. It's now a Wetherspoons. And our first year studio was in where the main bar is. So all of the students could walk around the balconies and throw stuff down at us.
So why did you end up going to Leeds?
They were one of my choices, and I got accepted a place unconditionally at Leeds. And I think UMIST was, I think, UWIST, the Welsh one in Cardiff, was probably the one that I'd set my sights on, but I didn't quite meet the A-level criteria. I didn't nudge over the right pass mark. So I went into clearing, and clearing offered me a place at Heriot Watt, I think, but I elected to go with Leeds.
And so what A-levels did you do?
Back in those days, it was much simpler, wasn't it? I did maths, and I did English, and I did art.
Right.
Just the three. And I was one of half a dozen students that were the first ever A-level students at the school.
So what was there beforehand? Were they like BTECs or?
They just didn't have upper sixth form students. They never got students to that level.
Right.
So they were sort of getting more and more ambitious, and they squeezed just 6 of us through. So yeah, it was good.
So your interest in art obviously started sort of relatively early on. Do you remember how old you were when you first got into it?
I can't remember when I first got into it, but I can remember always being interested, and it's what led me to architecture in the end. When I was still at junior school, I think in the final year there, so I'd probably just have been 11, when everybody was saying, "Oh, I want to be an engine driver or a crane driver or a truck driver when I leave school." I did a painting of a shop front. I can see it vividly in my mind's eye, but obviously I don't still have it. And someone said that's extremely precise draftsmanship in that drawing. You should be a draftsman. And my dad actually worked with someone who was a draftsman, so he said, we can have a chat with this guy. And he said, "No, you don't want to be a draftsman. You want to be an architect. You'll get paid a lot more money," which was probably the worst piece of advice I've I've ever had. And that was it. My mind was made up at 11 and I never varied from it. It was always my dream and intention to become an architect.
I think that it seems like you have to be quite kind of determined to be an architect.
I think so. If you don't, it's such a long course and such a difficult course, you get worn down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, just bear with me 1 second. I'm going to pause the recording. I've had a text message from a child upstairs. Sorry about that.
That's okay. It's all part of the joys of Zoom, isn't it?
It is. I got a text message from my daughter who's literally upstairs in the room above saying accident. So I went and ran up. What is it? What is it? She said, no, I called you by accident. Like, oh, phew, right.
Very good, very good.
Oh dear. Yeah, so we were talking about being determined when you're sort of people on the path of being an architect, is you have to kind of be quite dogged and go, right, that's where I'm going, that's what I want to do.
Yeah, people were trying to deter me at every step. The careers people arranged for me to go to visit the School of Interior Design at Batley, and they offered me a place on the spot, which was unusual. They normally did an entrance exam of some kind, but I didn't want to do that, and they eventually, after some delay, got me in to see an architect. And he said, you don't want to be an architect. so he didn't deter me either. And I'm now that person who says to people, you don't want to be an architect. I ignored it, but the careers teachers washed their hands of me because they were recommending entirely different careers. They were either wanting me to be a teacher or a marketing consultant. And I looked into what a marketing consultant was, and I said, well, basically, these are people who are trained to lie for a living and about how good products are. So, I didn't follow that route.
So at what point did you, because I always think that architecture is like learning to drive. You kind of don't know what it is until you've qualified and you're on your way, and then you can see whether you enjoy it or not. So certainly at university, I had no idea what I was letting myself in for when I started. It was, I think it was like the second year, the third year, and I thought, right, okay, I kind of get it. Is this what I want to do? And then I got the passion for it.
Yeah, the part threes that come through the practice, the various practices that I've worked with, some as mentor, they all have the same thing, that they say, we are not prepared for this. They don't teach us about this. They don't teach us about that. And they're right. Even with 7 years of training, they don't go anywhere near through the full complement of skills that you need to be a success in this game.
Yeah. Do you remember when the point where you thought, I'm an architect and I'm enjoying this?
Enjoying it, I suppose that's a bit of an exaggeration. I may have enjoyed the first 5 years, and I think after that it was downhill in so many ways. But I kind of I took to it like a duck to water, I guess. I was running jobs even as a student in my part three. And not being phased by any of it. I was quite lucky, I guess, in that respect. And there's a lot of stuff in those days that we didn't have to deal with that are commonplace now. A lot of the stuff such as sustainability and health and safety and CDM regs and all that kind of stuff just weren't on the cards. And even the building regs was just a single A5 volume that was about 1/4 of an inch thick, so we didn't even have that many regulations to worry about. And contractors were generally people you got along with. They used to joke about the stuff we did, but you could say to a contractor, I'd like to achieve this, and the contractor would say, yeah, I know how to do that, just go away and do it. And 9 times out of 10, they did a good job. These days, they want to know where to put every little nail and screw. And if you don't tell them, they're up in arms that you're not doing your job, and you've got to take responsibility for it. It's getting quite ridiculous, the level of information that they're demanding as a matter of course. We used to do whole projects on 2 or 3 drawing sheets, and now 200 or 300 is a small number. It's gone mad as the world, completely mad.
Do you remember, was there a turning point where you thought, this isn't all it was cracked up to be in that case?
Oh yeah, I remember that quite well. I did a spell in the Middle East in the early 80s, and I came back to work for a very large practice in Leeds. There no longer exists. It's John Warburton partnership of some of the older viewers may have heard of. And everything was going fine, and it changed while I was there. The whole sort of what an architect was and did started to change around there. So people like project managers suddenly started to appear, and there was talk of this strange new thing called design build that was being touted as the next big thing. And then contractors started to get litigious, and it became more and more a daily routine of writing responses to queries and claims just to defend your own position. And you weren't actually producing architecture anymore. You weren't producing drawings or information. You were just doing reams and reams of paperwork. And when the recession hit in the early 90s, and I'd already been thinking about setting up for myself, I thought it's time to get out. So I just became freelance. And then 6 months later, the recession got worse, and the practice went under that I'd been working with. And I did pretty well for myself for about 12 years or so.
Oh, that's interesting.
So I kept doing that until there was a recession. I can't remember the dates, but it would have been probably the early 2000s, where all of my customers either went under or massively downsized, and I just lost all of my work overnight.
What sort of work were you doing at that point?
It was a range of stuff. It was all for either architectural practices or departments responsible for architecture. So I was working, probably about half my workload was for Heathrow Airport, working in their technical centre, which went through various name changes. And in fact, when the recession hit, I lost that work because they shut the whole department down, literally overnight. And then I was working for smaller practices, just providing extra hands and experience to a pretty young team of technicians and the like who just needed some steering into the right direction to avoid making major foul-ups with contract administration and the like. And I was an expert in CAD at that time anyway. I'd been drawn into CAD because I developed an interest in computing right in the early days of, it was before any offices had computers of any kind, because the computers in those days filled rooms, were air conditioned, and had lots of white coated people who guarded them as their own little empire. And then these small cheap desktop things came out, and I bought kits and built my own computers, and I went on programming courses, and that came to the attention of the boss, and they said, well, we've heard about this thing called CAD, and we think that we might need it, and you're the only person we know who's got any interest in computers. Can you take a look at it? And I did, and never looked back. And I became sort of CAD consultant and CAD manager, and then BIM consultant and BIM manager in quick succession. So I'm BIM lead in my current role, although that title goes to someone else, I think, probably this week. So because my replacement is getting his contract in place. But yeah, it's been fun in parts, but it's also been a trial in parts, shall we say.
Yeah.
And I think my highlight was still back in the 80s when I was in the Middle East, and it was a project that was hand drawn. It wasn't done in CAD. It was the biggest project I'd ever worked on, and with hindsight, the most rewarding in
What
terms.
was it?
It was a sports complex in Oman, and it was for the equivalent of the Olympic Games, but just for the Middle Eastern countries. So it was a stadium and then a sports centre and athletes village and training facilities and all that kind of stuff.
What took you out there in the first place?
The firm where I was working, and I did relatively recently only been admitted to the RIBA, knew that I was probably wanting better things, and he knew I wouldn't get anywhere in the firm that I was working at because the boss wasn't actually letting the reins go. So he might make people associates, but he was never going to give them a share in the practice. And a friend of his called him and said he's putting a team together as an emergency, and had he any ideas for who to go? And he asked me if I'd be interested. So I thought, well, what the hell? And I went for it and got the job. And it was it was typical of architecture. Everything's a crisis. The job had just started on site, so we hadn't been involved in the design, but the whole design team had resigned. It had been a competition, and the architect was the lead in the competition, so they'd taken everyone else in with them. And they'd fallen out with the client's advisors, the equivalent of the project managers, as we call them now. And rather than give in to these advisors, they just walked off the job. And so they said, right, well, we need a new team. They gave it to the second placed competition winner because it had been an architectural competition, but they were Lebanese, and they insisted that only UK qualified personnel be employed on it. So they pulled up, I think it was 8 of us in to run the job, and I was the site architect on that project for 2 years. And it was it was a baptism of fire, I think. But I soon learned that you could boss around big contractors just the same you could the little guy doing the extension to your house. They were no different in that respect, and so long as you held your ground and knew what you were talking about, they generally were very good about it.
So if someone was thinking about taking a role overseas now, if say we had some young architects listening who were thinking about sort of traveling abroad, what advice would you give?
I think these days I would say go for it, but be a little bit more careful. It's not the same market it was in the 80s. It was a hardship posting in those days, and these days it's seen as a paradise posting. And there's a lot of competition from countries where the typical wages are considerably lower. So you'll find that a lot of the money isn't there anymore. You'd be doing it for experience rather than to make any kind of mad profits. In those days, we were given everything. We were given accommodation, car, all the rest of it. These days, you're given an allowance as part of your salary, and you have to find your own car and accommodation, as I understand it, in most of those countries. So yeah, go for it, but make sure the firm that you're working with follows some kind of code. Even if it's not the ARB or RRBA codes, they need to have a code. Otherwise, you are in for an interesting time, shall we say.
Well, I mean, would you say stick to something that's got an RIBA or an ARB code, because at least you've got some familiarity there?
I would do, yes. As it happened, after the first couple of years working for the Lebanese company, I did switch to WS Atkins. So obviously we were working to UK standards, but they were finding it increasingly difficult because a lot of the stuff was being designed and built to Indian standards, for example, which weren't quite as stringent as the UK standards, especially on things like structural design and such like. So structures that were being built that our structural engineer wouldn't touch. So it was getting difficult when I came back, and it's a lot more difficult now, I think.
So what brought you back to the UK after that?
It was partly end of contract, partly another recession.
Mm.
The country had no debt. They actually had a positive balance, so they didn't actually owe anything to anybody. But when the recession happened, they had this really interesting strategy. They said everything stops. So all government contracts just ceased, literally, at the point they were at. And one of our clients was the police military authority, and the guy said that they'd literally got one job that was 2 weeks from completion and only needed the tarmac on the access road. And they wouldn't let them put that down.
Gosh.
So it was literally we're not doing anything anymore. So I came back at that point.
And then what did you come back to? So where did you go after that?
I came back to the John Brunton practice there, straight into the CAD manager's role there, and I stayed there until the troubles hit. At one point, I was a director of a subsidiary company so they set up just to look after CAD services, not just within the organisation, but to third parties as well.
So what, you were CADing drawing for other people?
We were doing exactly that. Yes, we were acting as an agency, if you like. That office was based in Salford Keys, and I was based in Leeds. So my only real role was in the sort of directors' meetings, and just to make sure that the whole business was running in accordance with the overall company's policies and such like. But again, when the next recession hit, they just shut that down straight away.
So if anyone's listening to this, so to people who are listening to this, I'm hearing recession, and kind of you're making your career leaps sort of between recessions.
You do, and they come around with annoying regularity. And I would be very surprised if we didn't have another on the tail of COVID. I'm very surprised indeed. But I'm not going to care about that anymore. I should I shall be well out of it, I suspect.
So you're ending your career as a BIM manager?
They call me BIM lead. So I'm supposed to sort of guide the BIM use in the practice and to mentor the project teams on using BIM in their projects. To some extent, that often means going in and firefighting their BIM issues for them, which I'm doing at the moment on a project there where the contractor's BIM requirements have just got a bit out of hand. It's getting even more difficult with design and build to actually define exactly who does what and who's responsible for what in a way that everyone agrees with. And these discussions and disagreements are often fraught with acrimony, shall we say. So we're diving in to try and respond to that without regard for how much it's costing, unfortunately. So I'm trying to fix issues as I go, and we're getting there. That's a project that's due for handover probably about 2 weeks before I retire.
Right.
So yeah, we'll just sneak under the wire with it, hopefully.
Yeah. So you're sort of going back to your art now, aren't you, with your hand drawing?
Yeah, I kind of stopped doing hand drawing for fun when I started doing drawings in architecture, because certainly in the early days you only ever did hand drawing, and there was a lot of freehand stuff. In fact, even today I still do freehand drawing work for issuing details and just to explain things in 3D and such like, because it's simpler and quicker than CAD and BIM actually when you actually look at it. And I decided a while ago that when I retired, I was going to sort of take up art again as a hobby. And I was supposed to retire over a year ago. So I started taking up the art over a year ago, and I've been keeping it going since February before COVID. So all the way through COVID, I've been doing my daily sketch and other pieces of art, and I've been doing commissions, and it keeps me occupied, and I enjoy it. And it's actually a nice antidote to the stresses of architectural work, because it's a good tool for de-stressing and relaxation. So yeah, it's great.
So I'm going to share my screen. So if you're listening on a on Spotify, then you can find John's work on Instagram under @JDW Artist. And so we're just having a scroll through some of these, some of your latest works. There's a bit of a dry stone walling here going on.
It is. It's a. I do a lot of drawing in the Colne Valley, which is where I live in West Yorkshire. Not to be confused with the many other Colne Valleys that seem to dot this country. And yeah, the dry stone walls are a feature, and derelict buildings are a feature. So it's the sort of rundown dry stone walling that draws my eye more often than not. And this is a door to nowhere. Nowhere. I've absolutely no idea what this building was before. And there's a huge long water trough immediately to the right of it, which I'm going to draw as well. Because I'm trying to capture as many of the water troughs in the valley as I can. But having investigated it, I've realised that I probably still not have done them all by the time I die. There's that many.
Interesting. Yeah.
Absolutely scattered everywhere. Yeah. But yeah, it's an interpretation. It's not a literal representation of it. The colours are sort of what takes your fancy at the time, which is the artist whose workshop I attended that set me off on this route. Basically says you just ignore the colours and pick what brings it to life. So yeah, I'm doing that, and the spatter is I think that's just a fad of current art trends. You have to spatter your work now.
Is that a thing?
Yeah.
So so how do they start out? Are they ink or do pencil sketch first?
I used to spend pencil sketch, but I'm going straight in with the ink now, which is it's a little bit nerve-wracking, but you don't have to be that precious about things being precise. No one is ever going to know unless they're really that familiar with the thing that you're drawing. But yeah, the light pencil lines are always a good idea just to get the main framework in, but I'm avoiding them these days. Just going straight in with the ink. So it's ink and then wash.
So when you say wash, is that like watercolor or is it like more of an ink?
It's it can be inks, but it's all watercolor in my case. I haven't ventured into inks. It's expensive enough buying watercolors without buying inks as well. I've seen some very very beautiful work done in a similar fashion where they start with the line work in ink and then do the ink color washes as well. And if you think my colors are outrageous, this guy paints in bright blue and bright pink.
Yeah, I think the last time we talked, you were going through a bit of a blue phase.
Yes. So yeah, the one on the left down at the middle of the screen at the moment, that's Buxton. That's one of my field studies for a competition entry I've just completed. They have the annual Buxton Spa Art Prize, which I'm delivering my entry this week. So that's been occupying my time for a little while.
Oh, good luck with that.
So yeah, well, I don't imagine I'll win, but the experience would be interesting.
There's another dry stone wall with steps in.
Yeah, that is so weird. I have absolutely no idea what they were thinking when they put that together. I suspect it's a modern artifact. I don't believe it's an old configuration, unless possibly it could have been for milk churns, but I don't know. The lump on the top of the wall at the left-hand side is actually a carved rabbit. So again, that'll be a modern thing. And the one next to it, I just show a corner because that was one that I didn't want to reveal before and in fact the one just above it, which is the washing line, that was a commission,
right,
for a property that used to exist in Tameside. It's no longer there, and the lady provided me with a couple of photos and said, "Can I do this for a present for a mother who used to live there?"
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
So having a quick flick through, there's something a bit Star Warsy.
Yeah, May the 4th is the
Ah.
Star Wars Day, and someone had the idea, I'm going to do a May the 4th competition on Instagram. So you used to do over 4 days, there were 4 topics. So you did 4 sketches for it. No prize, just the just the number of likes you might get. I've got a commission out of it, actually. Somebody wants me to draw the Millennium Falcon for them. So
you never
yeah,
know where these things will take you.
yeah. Oh, that's my studio there on the left.
Yeah, I think when we were talking, you were using iPad Pro.
Yeah, I've not done anything since then on the iPad. The iPad Pro with Apple Pencil and Procreate, which seems to be the sort of the pinnacle of art applications for the iPad. It's very good. I've done a few drawings with it. No, I haven't done any watercolors with it yet. And I use the term advisedly. That you can create the effect of any kind of medium with Procreate, and so you can create the effect of watercolor, any kind of brush stroke, any kind of bleeding and blending of colors. So it's actually taking it, it's blurring the boundaries. So I'm going full circle from line to computer, back to line, and then back to computer again.
Yes,
it's
I know.
novel.
So where do you see yourself going in 5 years' time with this?
I hope to have done something that people want to see. So I'd like to get some exhibitions up and done it under my belt, and hopefully a few more pieces that are displayable, because most of what I do at the moment is just sketchbook stuff. And while people have asked for the originals, I always say no, I'm not tearing my sketchbooks up for anyone. I'm getting quite a pile accumulating now as well, so it's a reference for future works, and I've got lots of photographs, because most of the stuff I'm doing now with lockdown is from photographs rather than from life. I did get to there's a urban sketching movement, and a lot of architects who are sketchers and artists take part in this. There's a group in Yorkshire and there's a group in Manchester, and the Manchester group had their first session of the year about 4 weeks ago in Salford Keys. So I did get to that. So that was plein air sketching, as it's called, and that was enjoyable. Sorry?
Plein air sketching?
Yeah, it's a bit of an artifact term. It's PLEIN, which is it's just the French form. It means from life, I think. So it doesn't mean outside. It means that you'd actually have to be in front of the thing you're drawing.
Rather than a photograph type.
Rather than a photograph, yeah. Yeah. So you go into a museum or a coffee bar and draw. That's plein air. Or you can go outside and sketch the trams or the bridges or the buildings or people or whatever takes your fancy. That's pretty good. So having said that, COVID has started closing its grip again, and Manchester is probably a bit of a no-go area. So I haven't gone to the second one, which was yesterday. And I'll see how that goes. But yeah, it's all opportunity to get out and see what other people do and learn from other people, and hopefully enjoy a bit more sketching.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for coming on the program. Is there anything you want to ask me? I'm
just interested to see what kind of life you find architecture is turning out for you with your practices these days, because I certainly in a practice like Fairhurst, where I am now, where we've got all of a lot of our time is spent making sure that we're meeting these new regulations and codes and practices. Is the same for the smaller practices?
I'm at the other end of the scale, really. I'd probably say we're more like a micro practice, and we just do domestic extensions. So I'm hand drawing.
Yeah, I always think that domestic extensions, everyone thinks they're smaller, so they must take less work, but there's exactly the same kind of information to produce for something that's smaller. So it's actually more intense.
Mhm.
and in a shortest frame of time usually.
Yeah, that's true. But we start off by hand drawing sort of concept designs in front of clients, which actually saves a lot of time in the long run, because you nail down their actual requirements early doors.
Sure.
There's a lot less changes that we do than in a kind of traditional practice where that's computer driven. And then yes, we go into CAD, but we're still just doing 2D CAD and not 3D CAD.
Mm.
But we just offer a really simplified service, and we actually stop at building regs. So
Right.
so yeah, what we found is we kind of stop our services at building regs. We coordinate with structural engineer, and we kind of prepare information to give to the client to go out and tender it themselves.
Yeah, sure.
So we let the client handle the tender and the contract, and we'll kind of touch base with the client when they've got a contractor on board, just to ensure the lines of communication are open should there be sort of technical issues on site. Yeah, that way we find that we to start off with, I was offering a full service, and I found myself in the middle between the client and the contractor.
Yeah.
The conversations were being had between the client and the contractor and not informing me. So, if I'd drawn something, I was redrawing it. And the same with specifications. And at the end of the day, you might kind of design and specify one thing, but once they have a conversation with that contractor, it's always going to be a budget.
Yeah. It's the other way around as well, of course. The contractor wants to talk directly to the client so that he can save himself money and time. But that's still true for large projects as well.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah.
So I think we kind of do our tender processes kind of a light touch, and it works extremely well for us. So
Yeah. Interesting. A lot of our work is actually from building reg stage. We find we do what's called the delivery architect role as often as we do the design architect role, which is not always as smooth a transition as you might like.
Well, it sounds like you are looking forward to your retirement.
I am, yes. I think I think it's long overdue, and I probably made a mistake not retiring last year.
Well, thank you very much, John, for coming on Architecture in the Den.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So enjoyed it.
Pleasure. It's a pleasure. And if you're listening on Spotify, you can watch this on YouTube, and vice versa. If you're watching on YouTube, you can download us as a podcast on Spotify or through your smart speakers or whatever. Please do give us a like, and please can you share as well. And if you're interested in coming on the show and would like to be a guest, please contact me on the social media channels, Lisa Raynes, Lisa Raynes. So I'm just going to say thank you and good night, and thanks for coming on, John.
Thank you very much. Good night.